On a night when the snow fell like knives against the windows, a 9-year-old girl whispered a vow to herself. If I don't save myself, no one will. Her tiny body was bruised, her spirit crushed, and her mother watched in silence as the man she called stepfather unleashed his rage. But outside, through the roar of the storm, a powerful man sat alone in his car, a millionaire CEO drowning in grief, haunted by the ghost of his own daughter. He told himself to ignore it, to drive away, to bury the sound in wealth and silence. Yet one desperate cry tore through the storm, forcing him to make a choice. What happens when unimaginable pain collides with unexpected redemption? Stay with us because this story will change everything you believe about love, survival, and second chances. Subscribe now to Silent Lies and never look away. The night inside the Turner house was thick with silence, but not the kind that comforts or soothes. It was the kind that holds its breath before a scream. The storm outside clawed at the windows, battering the glass with fists of snow, but the real violence lived within the walls. 9-year-old Emma pressed her cheek to the icy wooden floor, her thin arms folded over her stomach as though she could shield herself from the boots that had already left her bruised and breathless. Her lips bled where she had bitten down hard, tasting iron while she forced herself not to cry. She knew that the sound of pain only fed the monster towering above her. Carl Benson smelled of whiskey and anger. His shadow fell across the wall like a twisted giant, his voice spitting venom with every word. He had raged about shoes left near the doorway, as if a child's small mistake could justify the fury in his blows. His boot had slammed into her ribs again and again until her vision blurred. He stood now, looming, his face red with alcohol, his breath hot and sour, his words a growl that turned the kitchen into a cage. Emma tried not to look at him, but her eyes betrayed her, darting sideways to the corner of the room where her mother stood. Denise's silk robe was pulled tight, her arms folded, her lips curled in a faint smile that chilled Emma more than Carl's rage. That smile was not protective, not even indifferent. It was complicit. Her mother's silence was the cruelest wound of all. Emma's chest ached, not just from the kicks but from the sharp knowledge that the woman who had given her life had chosen not to protect it. The kitchen smelled of burnt coffee and fear. The peeling wallpaper seemed to sag under the weight of every argument, every scream, every night like this one. It was as though the house itself recoiled, wishing to vanish into the storm. Emma closed her eyes and imagined the snow outside covering everything, covering the bruises, covering the sound of Carl's boots, covering even her mother's cold smile. In her imagination, she was behind the wheel of her old toy car, long broken but alive in her memory. She pressed her small feet against the phantom pedals and drove far away, away from the suffocating stench of whiskey and fear, away from the silence that cut deeper than screams. In her mind, she drove fast, hair whipping in the wind, her laughter echoing against the endless white of a world made clean by snow. But reality snapped her back with the sharp sting of another kick. Carl muttered curses and finally stalked down the hall, his boots pounding like drumbeats fading into another room. Denise lingered for a heartbeat, her gaze settling on Emma as though she were looking at something less than human, something unworthy of rescue. Then she too walked away, her slippers whispering across the linoleum. The absence of footsteps should have been relief, but it was a hollow relief, filled with the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a clock that seemed to measure only suffering. Emma pushed herself upright, her ribs screaming, her knees trembling, her breath ragged and metallic. She staggered to the window rimmed with frost and pressed her small hand against the glass. The cold seared her skin, sharp but honest, unlike the suffocating heat of Carl's breath or her mother's empty stare. "If only I could disappear," she whispered. Her voice was nearly lost to the groan of the storm, but the words hung in the air like a vow. She stared at the snowflakes whirling beyond the glass, fragile, luminous, each one drifting into the light of a distant street lamp. She imagined shrinking small enough to ride one, to fly far from this house, to vanish into the night where no one could ever hurt her again. Her breath fogged the glass, and for a fleeting instant, the world outside looked gentle. But the ache in her ribs and the sting in her lip reminded her she was still here, still trapped, still utterly alone. She limped to the back door, each step across the wooden floor like walking on shards of glass. Her bare feet burned with cold, but she forced herself forward. She had learned that waiting only made tomorrow worse. The latch was stiff, frozen from disuse, and as she pulled it, it let out a groan that made her heart seize in terror. She froze, listening for Carl's boots, for Denise's sigh, for anything. Nothing came. The house remained silent. She eased the door open, and the storm rushed in like a living thing, biting at her skin, whipping her hair against her face. She hesitated only a second, then stepped outside. The cold hit her ribs like knives, but she welcomed it. Every gasp was proof that she was still moving, still alive, still not trapped. The snow rose to her ankles, her breath fogging in frantic bursts. As she pressed forward, one step, another, and another. Behind her, the house shrank to a shadow, swallowed by the storm. The swing set swayed in the wind, empty, a memory of laughter long gone. Emma hugged her arms around herself and pressed on, whispering the only truth she had. If I don't save myself, nobody will. The storm engulfed her, the snowflakes sticking to her hair, freezing against her cheeks. Her small figure blurred into the night, her footprints fading almost as soon as they were made. She did not look back. She could not. Each step forward was defiance, a refusal to be erased by fear. Each whisper was a prayer that somewhere, someone might hear her, that the night might not be endless. She disappeared into the storm, a fragile ember refusing to die, a child walking into the unknown because the unknown was kinder than the home she had left behind. The storm devoured her as if the night itself wanted to erase her small body. Emma stumbled forward, her thin frame barely visible against the white roar of snow that swallowed the street. The cold bit deep, sharper than any slap, more merciless than Carl's boots, but she welcomed it. Each breath burned her lungs, each flake stung her cheeks, and still she moved. She had learned that the only way to survive was to keep moving. Her bare feet pressed into the icy drifts, the pain rising up her legs like fire before numbness spread and dulled everything. She hugged her arms around her chest, trying to hold herself together, whispering the same words over and over as if they might carry her forward. If I do not save myself, nobody will. Behind her, the Turner house faded into shadow, its peeling wallpaper, its burned coffee smell, its silence heavy with cruelty, all of it was swallowed by the storm. The swing set creaked in the wind, an empty monument to a childhood that had vanished the day her real father left her life. Emma did not dare glance back. Looking back would mean hesitation, and hesitation could mean Carl's fists, Carl's boots, or her mother's frozen smile dragging her into the nightmare again. The snow piled high against her legs, pulling her down, but she forced herself through it. Each step was rebellion, a cry against the silence, a refusal to surrender. The storm howled like wolves circling prey. Trees groaned under the weight of ice, branches snapping in the distance. The streetlights cast fragile circles of yellow that blurred and vanished in the gale. Emma squinted against the wind, her lashes heavy with frost, her tears freezing before they could fall. She wanted to scream, but she held it back. Screaming was dangerous. Screaming never helped. Instead, she focused on her footsteps, the rhythm of her breathing, the fragile thread of determination that kept her upright. The city lay just beyond the darkness, though she could not see it yet. Minneapolis was wrapped in silence, streets deserted, windows shuttered, a place where no one would expect a 9-year-old girl to wander alone through the storm. But Emma pushed forward, her heartbeat pounding in her ears louder than the wind. Each block she crossed, the more unreal it felt. The snow was both enemy and shield. It stung her, froze her, but it also hid her from Carl, from Denise, from the walls that had never been home. Out here, she belonged to no one. Out here, she was finally free, if only for a moment. She whispered again, voice ragged, "If I do not save myself, nobody will." The sound was almost swallowed by the storm, but in her chest it echoed like thunder. She thought of her toy car, long broken, but alive in her imagination. She thought of driving far, far away, of roads without end, of skies without storm. She thought of a house that smelled of cookies, not burnt coffee, of laughter instead of silence. And for a moment, she believed in it. For a moment, the snow felt like a promise instead of a punishment. Yet her body betrayed her. Her legs trembled, her ribs screamed with every breath, her lips cracked and stung with blood. She stumbled, falling into a drift that swallowed her knees, her hands plunging into icy powder that burned like fire. She gasped, fighting to rise, terrified that if she stayed down too long, the snow would keep her, bury her, silence her forever. With a whimper, she forced herself up, brushing flakes from her face, her hair plastered to her forehead, her fingers stiff and clumsy. She had no coat, no boots, no scarf, only determination and a desperate will to live. The storm pressed harder, a weight against her chest, as though the world itself wanted to test her vow. Her mind blurred, slipping between memories and dreams. She saw her father's face, faint and fading, his laugh carried away by the wind. She saw her mother's smile, cold and sharp, like the icicles dangling from rooftops. She saw Carl's shadow looming larger than life, boots pounding, voice booming, always booming. And then she saw something new, a light, not the cold, distant street lamps, but a softer glow, faint through the snow. She staggered toward it, her heart lurching with a hope she did not dare name. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. The wind shrieked, but through it came another sound, so faint she thought she imagined it. The low hum of an engine. A car. She turned, squinting through the blur of white. Her pulse quickened. For a moment, fear seized her. What if it was Carl? What if he had followed? But the silhouette was wrong, too large, too sleek. It was not him. The thought gave her enough strength to push forward closer until she reached the edge of a playground. There, the storm swallowed her once more, her small body crouched in the snow, arms wrapped tight, waiting, trembling, hoping. Across the city, a man sat in an SUV, watching the storm as if it might erase the skyline itself. His name was Ben Walker, and his life was defined by power, money, and a grief so sharp it hollowed him out. He did not know yet that the cry he was about to hear would break open the silence he had built like armor. He did not know yet that a child's whisper of survival was about to collide with his own buried vow to a daughter long gone. But the storm knew. The storm carried Emma's fragile breath through the night, carried it into the insulated quiet of Ben's car. And in that moment, fate shifted. Ben Walker sat in his black Escalade at the edge of downtown, the storm wrapping the city in a shroud of white. The engine idled, heat humming softly, while the world outside looked like it was dissolving into nothingness. Steam rose from manholes, streetlights flickered halos of gold in the swirling snow, and every corner of Minneapolis felt abandoned. This was the hour when the city transformed into a ghost town, alive only with echoes of regrets and the muted cry of sirens drifting from blocks away. Ben leaned back in his seat, his custom wool coat folded beside him, his phone buzzing every few minutes with reminders that meant nothing anymore. Meetings, calls, fundraisers, none of it pierced the armor of grief he had worn since the night his little girl Olivia died. His strong hands rested on the steering wheel, but they trembled with restlessness. He turned the radio to a jazz station, the saxophone rising and falling like smoke. Yet the music only deepened the hollowness. Every note seemed to gnaw at him, reminding him of absences, of the silence that followed laughter, of the warmth that had bled out of his home long ago. His penthouse was pristine, every surface shining, every room immaculate, but it was the kind of order that suffocates. Since Olivia's illness had stolen her, his world had shrunk to schedules, work, gym, sleep, repeat. His ex-wife Jenna had moved on, leaving behind nothing but the faint scent of her perfume lingering on guest towels. For Ben, even success tasted like ash. Outside, snow thickened, blanketing the streets in a relentless silence. He stared through the windshield, thinking absurdly that if he looked long enough, the city itself might dissolve, leaving only the storm and him. A strange thought comforted him if everything vanished. Maybe he would not have to remember anymore. His breath fogged the glass, and he closed his eyes, chasing the numbness that had become his only peace. Then it came. A sound that cut through the insulation, raw and fragile, not the wind, not the creak of snow-laden branches, but a cry, thin, desperate. A child's cry. At first, Ben refused to believe it. He told himself it was the storm, or maybe a stray animal. He turned the volume on the radio higher, forcing the saxophone into his ears. But the cry threaded through the notes, sharper, closer. His hand froze on the dial. He stared out into the swirling dark, heart thudding in his chest. The sound came again. Not a trick of wind. Not imagination. It was real. His first instinct was to shut it out. Do not get involved. That was the rule he had lived by for years. Do not let the world drag you into its pain. Pain destroys. Pain takes everything you love and leaves you with nothing but ghosts. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles whitened, telling himself to drive away. He thought about tomorrow's calendar, about the list of names and meetings lined up like soldiers. He thought about the heavy walls of his office, the security systems, the fortress he had built around himself. Safety meant distance. Safety meant silence. But the cry came again, and in it, he heard Olivia. Not her laugh, not her voice on good days, but the sound she made when she was afraid in the dark, whispering for him from her bed. "Daddy," she used to say, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her voice shaking. He could hear it now as if the storm itself had carried her back to him. The lines between past and present blurred. The grief he had buried deep surged, filling his chest until he could hardly breathe. He blinked, and for a heartbeat, he swore he saw her face hovering beyond the snow. His heart twisted. He told himself, "You do not owe anyone anything. You have already given everything." But the words rang hollow. All the wealth, all the power, all the walls he had built, none of it could drown a single child's cry. What good was security if he still felt helpless? The car, warm and polished, felt like a cage closing in. He remembered the nights when Olivia had cried for him, and he had whispered promises he could not keep. Promises that death had stolen from him. The weight of them pressed down now, demanding an answer. Ben's chest tightened. He thought of calling the police. He thought of driving away, pretending he had heard nothing. But his heart would not let him. Not again. Not after Olivia. The silence of his penthouse, the emptiness of his bed, the endless routines, they had all been built to shield him, but tonight they shattered. The walls fell, one by one, until only the storm remained. And within it, the cry. He snapped off the radio. The sudden silence roared louder than the storm itself. His hand reached for the door handle, and before he could second-guess himself, he stepped into the night. The cold slammed into him, slicing through his sweater, biting his skin, stealing his breath. He welcomed it. Pain meant he was alive. Pain meant he was choosing something. Snowflakes clung to his hair, melted against his lashes, numbed his fingers, but he walked. Boots crunching against ice, each step heavier than the last, his pulse hammering in his ears. He was not afraid. He was awake, needed, alive. The storm swallowed the city, but he followed the sound, his eyes straining against the blur of white. His chest burned, not from the cold, but from the realization that for the first time in years, something mattered more than his grief. The cry pulled him onward, guiding him past deserted sidewalks and lampposts glowing weakly in the haze. He turned a corner and froze. There, near the edge of a playground, was a small form crouched in the snow. A child, curled into herself, trembling, hair plastered to her face. Ben slowed, his body tense, his breath caught. He did not want to startle her, but she sensed him. Her head jerked up, eyes wide, terrified yet filled with something raw and searching. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the storm hushed. He saw her fear. He saw her pain. And he saw something else, a flicker of desperate hope. Ben's knees gave out, and he knelt in the snow, the wet chill seeping through his clothes. He pulled off his coat and held it out, his hands shaking. His voice was low, steady, though his heart thundered. "It is okay. I will not hurt you, I promise." The words were a vow, trembling with regret, with longing, with a broken man's need to redeem something of himself. The child did not move at first. Snow swirled between them, thick and endless. Then, slowly, she reached out, her tiny hand finding his. The world narrowed to that single touch. Cold skin against warm, fragile trust extended where trust had been shattered too many times before. Ben's chest ached. He wrapped his coat around her, and as the storm raged above them, he knew with absolute certainty, walking away was no longer an option. The snow swirled between them like a living curtain, fragile flakes tumbling in the yellow glow of the lamppost. Emma's wide eyes clung to Ben's, mistrust and desperation locked together in one trembling gaze. Her breath came in ragged bursts, small clouds fogging the frigid air. She recoiled slightly as his coat brushed her cheek, her body tensing, ready to flee into the storm again. Ben froze, terrified that he might break her fragile trust with the wrong move. His own heart stuttered, every instinct screaming to tread gently. Then, slowly, the weight of the wool coat registered for her. The warmth seeped into her skin. The rigid line of her body softened, and a shiver broke free, her teeth chattering against the sudden shock of kindness. Her face cracked with exhaustion, and she slumped forward, surrendering not to him, but to the chance of survival. Ben's chest clenched as he took in the details that the storm had tried to erase. Her lips were split, her jaw bruised, her arms marred with purple splotches and crusted cuts. The bones of her collarbone showed through her torn dress. Guilt twisted inside him. He whispered almost to himself, "You are safe now." His voice wavered, heavy with regret for the past, hope for redemption, and a desperate wish that someone had once spoken those words to Olivia. Emma's eyelids fluttered, as if she wanted to believe, as if the fight inside her was finally loosening its grip. When he lifted her into his arms, she weighed almost nothing. Too light, too fragile. He could feel her shoulder blades pressing sharp through the fabric, her small feet dangling limp, already numb and pink from the cold. He moved quickly, boots sliding on the icy curb, his body tight with adrenaline. The storm pressed against him from every direction, but he kept his focus on the car, the warm sanctuary waiting. Emma's head lolled against his chest, her uneven breaths loud in his ears, each one a fragile reminder that she was still alive. At the SUV, he laid her gently in the passenger seat. The heat blasted as he turned it higher, but Emma flinched even at the soft brush of the seatbelt. She curled into the oversized coat, fingers twisting the fabric as if afraid it might vanish. Ben's throat tightened. He reached for his phone with shaking hands, scrolling to Rachel Kim's number. Rachel was a friend, and one of the few people he trusted, a pediatric nurse with a steady heart. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy but instantly alert when she heard his tone. "Rachel, I need you," Ben said, his voice breaking. "I found a child. She is hurt. No questions now. Meet me at my place in 10 minutes. There was a pause, then Rachel's steady reply. "I will be there. Keep her warm." He hung up and looked at Emma again. The dashboard light painted her face pale, her eyes downcast, her hair falling in tangled curtains. She whispered, lips trembling, "My mom's name is Denise, but she does not help me. My stepdad, Carl, he hurts me." The words came out broken, like shards of glass she had been forced to swallow for years. Ben's hands tightened on the wheel, fury rising, but he forced his voice calm. "Thank you for telling me, Emma," he said softly. "No one will hurt you here." He meant it, even as the weight of responsibility settled on him like stone. Driving through the storm, he checked the rearview mirror again and again, half expecting headlights to appear, for Carl's shadow to rise and snatch her back. The city blurred past, swallowed by snow, but inside the SUV, time slowed. Emma curled tighter into the coat, her small hand clutching the lapel as if anchoring herself to the moment. Her breaths were shallow, uneven, but she stayed awake, her eyes darting to him, unsure, frightened, yet clinging to the faintest sliver of trust. They reached his building, the private garage opening with a groan of steel. Ben guided the SUV inside, pulling into the safety of the underground. He touched Emma's shoulder gently. "We are home. Just for tonight. This is home." Her eyes closed, not in sleep, but in surrender. The fragile acceptance of someone who had never known safety until now. He carried her through the elevator, each shiver rattling her bones, echoing in his chest like a demand he could never ignore. When the doors opened onto his penthouse, Rachel was already waiting. She dropped her coat to the floor, her medical bag at her side, her eyes wide with concern. Ben laid Emma on the sofa, the child curling in on herself, dwarfed by the oversized coat. Rachel knelt beside her, her hands gentle yet firm, her voice warm as she spoke. "Hi, sweetheart. I am Rachel. I am going to help you, okay?" Emma hesitated, lips trembling, but finally whispered, "Emma. My name is Emma." Rachel gave her a small smile. "That is a beautiful name. Thank you for telling me." Rachel worked swiftly, cleaning cuts, checking her breathing, bandaging bruises. Emma winced but did not cry. Her silence was practiced, the silence of survival. Ben hovered uselessly nearby, his hands shoved in his pockets. He had commanded boardrooms, closed billion-dollar deals, but here, in the presence of one wounded child, he felt powerless. He poured water, fetched towels, adjusted the thermostat, anything to keep from collapsing under the ache in his chest. Rachel finally looked up at him and gave a small nod. She will be okay, but she needs rest. Ben carried her into the guest bedroom, laying her beneath flannel sheets, tucking a heavy comforter around her. She stared at the unfamiliar room, the tall windows, the wall of books, the soft lamp glow. He hesitated, then reached for a small battered teddy bear from a shelf. Its fur was worn, one ear barely stitched, the last relic of Olivia. He placed it gently in her arms. "This belonged to my daughter," he said quietly. "She held it when she was scared. Maybe it will help you too." Emma hugged the bear tightly, her small chin pressing into the matted fur. Her eyes fluttered closed, her breath slowing at last. For the first time in years, she fell asleep without fear. Ben stood by the door, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, overwhelmed by relief and a fragile, terrifying hope. The days that followed were heavy with preparation, each moment strung tight with a mixture of fear and fragile hope. Inside Ben's penthouse, the air seemed softer, as though the walls themselves were learning to breathe again. But outside, a storm of another kind was gathering, not of snow this time, but of law and consequence. Emma's bruises were not just wounds, they were evidence. Her whispered confessions were not just secrets, they were testimony. And Ben knew that saving her did not end with warmth and safety. It would end only when Carl was stopped and the past was exposed under the unforgiving light of truth. Marcus Lane, Ben's head of security, worked quietly behind the scenes. He was methodical, his calm voice carrying weight as he pieced together neighbors' accounts, old police reports, hospital records that had never been explained. He gathered statements, photographs, fragments of a story that had been hidden for too long. Each update delivered in hushed tones at Ben's desk fueled the fire in Ben's chest. Anger pulsed through him with every detail of what Carl had done, but determination steadied his rage. "We will make sure he never touches her again," Marcus said one night, his tone unwavering. Ben nodded, his jaw clenched, his hand tightening on the back of a chair until his knuckles blanched. Cheryl Stanton, their attorney, arrived each morning with files stacked high and eyes that missed nothing. Her presence filled the penthouse with an air of sharp focus, her voice crisp as she outlined legal strategies. She walked Ben through custody filings, prepared witness lists, rehearsed courtroom questions with Rachel, who would provide medical testimony. She listened carefully to Emma, not pushing, simply allowing the child to speak when she could. Emma's soft words were halting but clear. What life was like inside the Turner house, how silence and pain had become her constant companions. Cheryl never flinched. She took Emma's words and turned them into armor. The night before the hearing, tension wrapped the penthouse like a second storm. Emma sat curled on the couch, the teddy bear clutched tight, her knees drawn to her chest. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Will they send me back?" Ben's heart clenched, his throat tightening. He sat beside her, his hand wrapping gently around hers. He could not promise her the future, not yet, but he let the silence speak. "I am here. I will not let you go." They sat together, watching snow fall beyond the windows, until her small body sagged against him, exhaustion overtaking fear. Morning came early, gray light spilling across the city. The penthouse buzzed with nervous energy. Rachel braided Emma's hair with steady fingers. Marissa checked paperwork again and again. Cheryl organized her files. Marcus stood watch near the door. Ben dressed in his sharpest suit, but his chest throbbed with a vulnerability he had never felt in a boardroom. This was not a negotiation. This was a battle for a life. The courthouse loomed, its marble steps wet with melting snow, its columns rising like judgment itself. The hallways inside pulsed with tension, families huddled in corners, lawyers striding briskly, the air heavy with anxiety. For Emma, the world narrowed to one room, the courtroom where her truth would finally be heard. She sat at the front beside Ben and Cheryl, her small frame dwarfed by the wooden bench, her feet not touching the floor. Across the aisle sat Carl, stone-faced, his eyes narrowed, and Denise rigid, her gaze darting nervously between the judge and the daughter she had abandoned. The judge entered, silver hair framing a face etched with authority, her steady eyes cutting through the charged air. Testimony began, and the atmosphere thickened. Cheryl guided Emma through her story with patience, never rushing. Emma's words trembled, but they did not break. She described nights filled with boots against wood, the sharp tang of blood in her mouth, the way fear lived in every corner of the house. She spoke of her mother standing by, silent, smiling faintly as if the violence was a performance she accepted. Carl's lawyer objected, painting her as confused, but Cheryl countered each point with clarity. Then came the moment Cheryl had prepared for. She laid Emma's journal before the judge. The room stilled, page after page filled with childish handwriting, shaky drawings of the house, notes scrawled about pain and hope, about dreams of escape. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, every person present drawn into the raw honesty of a child's record of survival. The judge's eyes lingered on the journal, and in that stillness the tide shifted. Then Denise was called to testify. The questions cut sharp, Cheryl pressing with precision. Denise tried to hold her composure, her lips trembling, her hands clenched in her lap. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her voice wavered under the weight of her own lies. Finally, with Emma's journal open before her and the eyes of the court upon her, she broke. Her voice cracked as she confessed. I knew. I knew what he was doing. I was afraid. I did not want to lose him. But I should have stopped it. I should have helped her. The words fell like stones in water, rippling through the room. Gasps rose. Carl's mask of bravado cracked, and for the first time, he looked small. Emma's eyes filled with tears, not of fear but of grief for the mother she had never truly had. Ben squeezed her hand, his own vision blurring. Cheryl rose, her voice fierce as she delivered her closing argument. She held the journal high. This is not imagination. This is truth written by a child who survived what no child should. Her voice matters. Her pain matters. Justice demands to be served. The judge's verdict came swift and steady. Emergency custody was granted to Ben Walker. Carl was to be taken into custody, charged with abuse. Denise's parental rights were revoked, her shoulders crumbling as the bailiffs led Carl away in chains. The courtroom exhaled as though it had been holding its breath. Emma clung to Ben's side, still tense, still trembling, until she looked up at him with eyes wide and voice small. I am really free now? She asked. Ben knelt, meeting her gaze, tears threatening to fall. You are free, Emma, I promise. Light spilled through the tall windows, golden against the marble floor, illuminating them both as though the storm outside had finally broken. The courtroom was behind them, but its echoes followed like shadows. Emma walked out gripping Ben's hand, her small fingers clinging to him with the fragile strength of someone who had finally been told she was safe but could not yet believe it. Snow glittered outside, the winter sun piercing through the clouds as though the world itself wanted to acknowledge what had just been decided. For the first time, Emma was free. But freedom was not the end. It was only the beginning. Ben made good on his promise. The process of adoption was filled with paperwork, home visits, background checks, and endless signatures, but he never faltered. Each question asked by officials, each form signed in triplicate, he welcomed as proof that this was not temporary. Emma was not passing through his life like a ghost. She was his daughter now. The day the judge finalized it, declaring Emma his child in every legal sense, something inside him loosened. Years of grief that had choked him since Olivia's death finally shifted, leaving space for hope. Emma's eyes had shimmered when she heard the words, and Ben swore he would never forget that look as long as he lived. He wanted Emma's new beginning to be more than documents. Together, they designed her bedroom. Emma chose swan print sheets that shimmered with silver threads, fairy lights strung along the headboard, shelves stacked with storybooks, and a rug so soft it felt like clouds underfoot. She drew pictures and framed them, insisting they hang proudly on the walls. At last, she painted a sign for her door with small, careful letters. Home. The paint smudged in places, but every stroke was a vow. It was her sanctuary, the first space in her life that belonged wholly to her. The penthouse, once pristine and sterile, began to change. It softened. The silence that had haunted its high ceilings broke under Emma's laughter. Marissa arrived with board games and terrible jokes, Rachel with pancakes and gentle hugs. Emma called them her aunts, and they embraced the title, fussing over her school projects, brushing her hair, and saving her the last slice of pie. Marcus stopped by at odd hours, giving updates on Carl's case, his presence steady and protective, though never in Emma's sight. Cheryl visited with her sharp suits and sharper wit, making Emma smile even when discussing courtrooms and judges. Piece by piece, the penthouse transformed from a fortress into a home filled with warmth, voices, and footsteps. The first real test came when Emma invited a friend from school for a sleepover. Her voice had been hesitant when she asked Ben, as though she feared the answer. He said yes immediately, and her eyes had lit with excitement. The girls built a pillow fort in her room, whispering stories and giggling until late. At one point, Ben overheard Emma sharing her past in soft, steady words, not as a victim but as someone who had survived. Her friend hugged her and called her strong. Ben stood in the hallway, tears stinging his eyes, pride filling his chest. Healing was not just possible, it was already happening. Still, the nights carried their own ghosts. Sometimes Emma woke sweating, clutching the teddy bear tight, her eyes wide with fear until Ben appeared in her doorway. He would sit beside her, smoothing her hair until her breathing slowed, whispering the same words again and again. You are safe now. I am here. Each time she drifted back to sleep in his presence. His heart ached and healed in equal measure. As Christmas approached, the city glittered with lights, but the brightest glow was inside their home. Emma sat on the floor one afternoon, surrounded by paper scraps and glue, tongue poking out in concentration as she crafted a paper angel. The fairy lights twinkled on the tree, reflecting in her eyes. Ben knelt beside her, helping press the delicate wings in place. "She is perfect," he said. Emma beamed, and together they placed the angel at the top of the tree. For her, it was not just decoration. "She will watch over us," Emma whispered. And for Ben, it felt true. That night, they gathered for dinner, laughter spilling through the rooms, the smell of cinnamon and pine weaving through every corner. Ben's phone buzzed quietly on the table. He almost ignored it, unwilling to disturb the moment. But when he looked, he froze. A message from Denise. Her words were unexpected. She was in therapy now, trying to change. Attached was a drawing, a crayon sketch of two angels holding hands, signed for Emma. "You are never alone." Ben stared at the image, emotions tangled. Relief, sorrow, hope. He looked at Emma, her cheeks flushed from laughter, her eyes bright. Healing was never simple, he realized. It was not a single act, but a path, one taken step by step, sometimes even by those who had failed before. Later that night, Ben tucked Emma into her swan print sheets. The paper angel glowed softly at the top of the tree outside her room. She hugged the teddy bear and whispered, "This is the best Christmas ever." Ben smoothed her hair, his heart full. "It is only the beginning," he promised. When she drifted to sleep, he walked to the living room, gazing at the tree and its handmade angel. Snow fell silently beyond the windows, blanketing the city in white. He whispered into the quiet, "The truth is, you saved me, Emma." The words lingered in the glow of the lights, a benediction, a vow, a recognition that hope can rise even from the coldest winter. And as the angel watched from its perch, the house pulsed with the heartbeat of a family reborn. There are stories that leave scars, and there are stories that rebuild. Emma's journey began with silence, her mother's silence, the silence of walls that witnessed violence and chose not to speak. But in that silence, a cry rose, fragile yet unyielding, carrying through the storm to reach someone who had buried his own grief in wealth and solitude. That night, when Ben Walker stepped from his car, it was not just a rescue. It was a collision of pain and redemption, of a child refusing to disappear and a man daring to believe that broken hearts can still save one another. Emma's freedom was not won in a single night. It was fought for in courtrooms, in whispered testimonies, in journals inked with a child's trembling hand. It was carried on the shoulders of those who chose to stand beside her, Rachel's steady compassion, Marissa's warmth, Marcus's vigilance, Cheryl's relentless pursuit of justice. But more than anyone, it was carried by Emma herself, a 9-year-old who whispered, "If I don't save myself, nobody will," and found the courage to keep walking forward through the snow. Today, her story is not one of defeat, but of rebirth. A home once cold has been remade with laughter, drawings taped to refrigerators, pancakes shared on quiet mornings, and a paper angel watching over a family stitched together by choice, not chance. Emma is no longer just a survivor. She is a daughter, a friend, a voice that could not be silenced. And Ben, once consumed by grief, has found that healing is not about forgetting the ones we lost, but about daring to love again, to fill the empty spaces with something new, something real. This is the promise of Emma's story, that even in the darkest winters, even when silence seems endless, hope can rise. It reminds us that family is not always the one we are born into, but the one we fight to create. It reminds us that the smallest acts, listening, choosing to care, stepping into the storm, can change the course of a life. And now, to you watching, if this story has touched your heart, if you believe in the power of resilience, of second chances, of love that refuses to break, we invite you to stay with us. Here at Silent Lies, every story is a reminder that silence does not have the final word. Love does, kindness does, courage does. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join us as we continue to share stories that matter, stories of survival, of hope, and of the quiet heroes among us. Because the next story might be the one your heart has been waiting for.